Today's guest, Jacob Eckeburger, is joining me to talk about his very intentional walk into transformation through the exploration of wellness and what it really meant to be well, to maintain wellness, more than just healthy eating and a bit of exercise. His journey is a really encouraging and inspiring one, and along the way we talk about understanding really the difference between passion and purpose and how that pivot in his understanding of those two things has really led to a lot more freedom as he journeys towards wellness. I think you'll appreciate the framework that he brings and the tools that he's using to have that conversation. Welcome to the show. Are you thirsty for inspiration and curious about the life-changing process of transformation? Welcome to The Transformationist. Whether you already know the transformation you're looking for or you're looking for guidance on the way there, these stories of hope will give you practical tips, plenty of encouragement, and an invitation into real, life-giving transformation, whether you're transforming culture or becoming more yourself. Your story is welcome here. On this week's episode of The Transformationist, I absolutely love hearing stories of people going through their own transformative work. And it looks different for everybody. The motivations are different for each person that stumbles into a process or very intentionally walks into a process of transformation. But I love hearing these stories. And so when Jacob reached out and was like, here's this amazing stuff that I'm doing in my life, I immediately knew that I wanted him to come and share his story and his journey with you guys, the Transformationist community. So welcome, my friend Jacob Eckeburger. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. And Natasha, it is seriously any excuse to get to chat with you, get to unpack life stories or solve world problems. I'm excited about. So I'm thrilled to be here.
You are so kind. Many kindness points right there.
Perfect. I'll keep it tally.
Tell us a little bit about you and who you are and where you find yourself in the world so that we can orient ourselves into your story.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm Jacob. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota with my wife and 3-year-old dinosaur /son. And we're welcoming our newest addition to our family here in the next couple of weeks. So life is in the midst of serious transition and those things. But, I grew up in a pastor's family. So my dad was a youth pastor. Ever since college and beyond, I've been involved in ministries and organizations that serve interdenominationally. So lots of different churches, lots of different denominations. And that's what I do today, too. So I work for an organization, a nonprofit based out of Minneapolis called YouthWorks. We do short-term mission trips for teenagers. And so I get to help solve problems and lead a couple of teams that handle church partnership relationships and stuff all along the way. So yeah, quick synopsis of
I liked it.
My story. That was the fastest I've ever done that.
It was good. It was right. Like you got in the major facts, the major plot points. It was great. Yeah. So here's the thing. I guess it was a few months ago now, I saw a Facebook post and you were talking about how you were entering into a real season of intentionality that I would just by, from outside observation would describe as, oh, you're totally in a transformation period. You're in a transformative journey right now. But you spoke about having kind of chosen this theme around well-being and wanting to really dive in and understand what aspects of well-being could mean for you in your life. And so can you tell me a little bit about that genesis and why you wanted to dive into this kind of journey?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, for me, it came out of kind of a culmination of about a year's worth of my own processing of some career job change stuff where I was working in an organization that if you talk about the dream situation where you're doing work that aligns with what you feel like is quote unquote your purpose, passion, all of that stuff with like an actual job that pays you to do it. Like that's where I was in. And then that organization got acquired, was purchased, and I all of a sudden was thrust into this world of, oh my goodness, I'm not able to do that anymore. But in the chaos of that acquisition and transitioning into a new organization and taking on a leadership role of that new organization and trying to fix a lot of work with a team to fix a lot of problems and issues, it sent me into about a year's worth of a process where I was not pursuing my well-being in the best ways. If that makes sense. So there's a pub here in Minneapolis called Merlin's Rest, and I got to know a couple bartenders really well. And there was I mean, I'm talking to the whiskey girl, so like it's not from that perspective, but it's from like just the realization that I started kind of jamming down this like these issues that were all related to this sense of recognizing that I walked through a little bit of trauma, like a little bit of life trauma, and any sort of big shift like that, being able to like formally recognize that and create space to formally recognize that is critical. But I didn't do that. I was so focused on just like meeting the needs of other people and of this new organization and everything that was like right in front of me. And because of that, I kind of pushed my own pursuit of well-being to the side. And it just created a really unhealthy view of myself, like internally. It created a really unhealthy like view of what my role was to be in the world, and even it started affecting like my marriage and my parenting of our kid and relationships, all that stuff. And so for me, partially I started this pursuit because I started, with the basics of, gosh, I haven't been eating healthy. I've been drinking too much. Like I've been going down and just not taking care of those sort of core essentials. And it helps that my wife is a health coach. So like being able to check that box is good. But I also started to recognize that my well-being is more than just the physical health of my body. And it has to be, because that stuff, I mean, on one hand, like you do have control, but on the other hand, that control can be taken away by things that you can't control, right? Or genetics play into it in a way that you literally have no control over it. So there's things like that like I'm in a privileged position where I can choose to take that ownership of my body and get into a very physically healthy situation. But I also recognize how easily that could be taken away. So I just felt like there has to be a deeper sense of well-being. And so I got to it through on an honest round of Google searches for myself, because that's where it all comes back down to, right?
Google, absolutely.
Right. Our teachers and philosophers are all share a name, and that's Google. And so for me, I landed on the University of Minnesota has a school of like spirituality and well-being. And in this school, they got a grant a couple of years ago to produce like an outward facing class that, whether you're a part of the school or not, you can like take these free courses that walk you through a pursuit of well-being. And they break it down in a way that I never heard before. If there's anyone out there like listening that has a clinical like psychological background, I'm sure this is like old hat. But for me, it was new, and it broke it down into 6 pieces. One was health. The second one was relationships. Third is security. Fourth is purpose. Fifth is community. And sixth is environment. And the idea is if all, or at least the majority of those are considered like, are being operated in a good way and like a ideal way, then you're achieving well-being that's like way beyond just your physical health. Like it touches on your emotional, your spiritual, communal, all of these things. And the thing I loved about it, honestly, was, in my life, I have a lot of friends that come from lots of different backgrounds and have different accessibilities to different things. And some of them are in financial situations where they can join gyms, where they can be a part of like health programs that cost, hundreds of dollars a month. Others, that's not realistic. And so for them, they have to pursue health in other ways. And even in the midst of that, I have friends that are doing incredible things that seem like they've found a good sense of well-being for their life, but they are confined to a wheelchair, or they're walking through the depths of like the worst case scenarios of cancer in their own body, and they're having to figure out, what does my well-being look like if health is something I can't control, like if the physical health of my body is something I can't control. So that's been like a part of my pursuit with it. But and then that kind of brought me to where I think you and I started connecting around this stuff.
Yeah, so there's so much in that I want to explore, and so I'm hopeful that we'll get a chance to dive and touch into many of those spaces. But I want to go back, if we can, to the season before you entered into the intentionality and kind of stumbled into these 6 principles of wellness. Because I'm fascinated. I sent you a link to my quiz the other day, where I talk about, which is the transformation archetypes. And what's so interesting to me is that as you were describing what was happening, I was just seeing, because you came out on that quiz as the action hero archetype, didn't you?
Yeah.
And so as you were describing both the circumstance of before, so, that period of time of immense change and stress and insecurity in terms of work and life, and then trying to manage all of that stuff, I was just hearing the action hero side of you in full raw. And then what's so interesting is that as soon as you started talking about wanting to pay attention then to the well-being side of it, wanting to turn your attention from the external, which tends to be where the action hero goes first, right? Like, okay, what's outside of me that I can fix, that I can solve, that I can take some sort of action on. But then as soon as you made that transition so beautifully to, okay, now that I've actually realized I need to pay attention to what's happening internally within me, you then leap straight into action. And which I just love, because one of the elements, and what I think one of the reasons why I recognize this as what I would call transformationist work is that you've found yourself in a place of external and internal realignment needing to happen. But you've dived into it in a way that's not necessarily the same way that other people would. That's my reflection anyway. But what was, when you were diving into Google searches and starting to look at, okay, how do I figure out the thing that I'm going to do? What was the primary outcome that you were looking for? Did you have in mind like an idea of what it was that you wanted to change about how life was, or was it more nebulous than that?
No, it was more of it was much more like it felt much more undiscovered and like blurred lines, and like I kind of had a sense of what was disjointed and disconnected in myself, but I really felt like if I'm going to figure it out, part of the process of growth is just stopping long enough to like look closely at yourself and learn about who you are in that moment, because we all hope that we will always be the same exact person, in life. Well, maybe that's a poor statement. Maybe not everybody does. Maybe everybody sees the value in change. But like, if the world, in my mind, it would be amazing to always count on my, dreams being the exact same, my like feelings being the exact same. But the reality is, they change on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, and I have struggled with that in the past. And so I just know that if I'm going to step into a season of growth, like the very first thing that comes along with my step is running a parallel course of like introspection, of self-evaluation along the way. And I think it's key to like to do it as you move and not like sit, on the floor for 3 or 6 months, do that introspection and then move. Because if you do that, like you're kind of doing it in a bubble and you're not having that like practical, because a lot of people I feel like they get frozen because they feel like, well, I know things need to change, or I know I need to stop and do this, but it's just not a good time. Or before I figure out what my dream is going to be, I gotta like make sure I carve out all the time to investigate and like all that stuff. And the reality is, just do stuff. Like do what you need to do, and do the self like reflection, introspection alongside it. And I mean, being able to develop those things externally is, I think, way more telling of who you actually are and what you actually want to do, because you're forced with like real life situations with it. So I was looking for something I could do parallel with everything else that was going on in my life. So like in a lot of ways, some of my favorite like people to learn from are people who are in sort of parallel industries or parallel like paths in life, not necessarily on the same one, but like that you could easily draw connections to, because it's just it's a slightly different perspective. It's a slightly different way of viewing it. And that's the way that I do my own like personal learning too, is I kind of step into stuff I haven't really looked at before, but that could easily tie in. And so the pursuit of health was an easy tie-in for me, because I knew I needed to sync up a really busy, chaotic schedule with like figuring out, how do I eat healthy, along the way? How do I not just like go to what's convenient? How do I take control over that in my life? And the pursuit of relationships was really parallel for me too, because I was shifting into a season where like we moved to a new location and are starting friendships from scratch. So like being to intentionally like go out and force myself to like connect with people over coffee that I would have never reached out to before, just for the sake of like, I'm in this commitment to find good relationships and figure out what that is, or to like commit to it long term. And the same thing with security. And now I'm actually like wrapping up a month of like my own focus of purpose, and being able to do that alongside the work I'm doing since my transition from my previous job with my previous organization, didn't really feel like it was an alignment of purpose. But this month focus of it for me has like unpacked this realization that maybe my definition of purpose is wrong. Maybe I started with the wrong expectation of purpose. It's kind of like you put expectations on a partner or a spouse, but you never explain to them what their expectations are, and then you're disappointed they don't meet them. And it's like, well, you should just set it in the first place, and it would have been easier,
Yeah, if we could eliminate unspoken expectation from the world, I think there would be a lot of less complicated components of life on planet Earth.
Oh my gosh. But then like things like Dr. Oz or like Dr. Phil wouldn't exist. And what would we do without those types of stories, right?
I think I would be fine, to be honest. Okay, so let's do the recap. So because I think one of the parts that's interesting of this is that you in taking this very intentional, okay, I'm going to do the internal reflection alongside some action and activity in life. So you broke it down in this Facebook post for everybody to see, and I saw it and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So you spent the first month, did you kind of take like each month I'm going to have a different focus, I'm going to focus on one of these kind of principles of well-being, and then flesh out some ideas around it? Okay, well, can you give us the quick step through any key highlights that came out of each of those month-long focuses?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, well, and for me, like I intentionally put a month like timeline on each of them to force myself to deal with it and not like push it off or not try to get it perfect by the end of that month, but just recognize that an end date is coming and I'm going to move on to the next one. So I got to just finish it. I got to like push through and put these deadlines on it. So like for me on the health side, the thing that was so eye-opening for me was as a part of my pursuit of health, I also reached out to a bunch of people that I really love and respect that are coming from very different walks of life. Everyone from like an MMA fighter and like physical trainer to someone who works. He's quadriplegic and he works for agencies that create. You know, fair and welcoming environments for people with varying disabilities, to somebody who is walking through the second bout of cancer and it is not going well, and just getting their definitions of like what health means.
Mm.
And for me, it really is this like I came out of my month of health, number one, like on the practical side, like way healthier. Like I focused on like how I was fueling my body and all that stuff, but it came from a sense of like recognizing how much of a celebration it is of what my body can do, and less about like, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds or I want to lose 30 pounds so that like I fit this ideal stereotype of what I'm supposed to look like.
Mm.
Like it was much more about like, there are seasons in life that I will come into where I lose control of my health, not because of I'm eating McDonald's every day, but like because things in life take it away from me. And so this season I'm in, like I want to celebrate it and live into it and let it be something that like I get to truly enjoy. Whereas like before, I wasn't doing that well. So that was good for me, because like the coaching I got from my friends who were either born in a way that their physical health just isn't like mine, or were having their physical health taken away by disease. Their recommendation was like, don't make it everything. Like it's important, but at the end of the day, like you have to find hope outside of it, and peace outside of it. And so that really spun me into like the second month of relationships, which was starting to recognize like, you know, as an adult, where like you're outside of, you know, a school setting or a work environment setting where like you're kind of, you get forced relationships that
Mm.
you sort of, it creates a bit of safety. So you have to go out and like find them somewhere like that allowed me to focus on like, who are the people that I want in my life? Who are the people that I want in my life? Either because I just really respect and love what they do. Their perspective challenges me. They've been a mentor from a distance of mine for a long time, and now I want them to be a monthly call type mentor, you know, that sort of thing.
Mm.
As well as like recognizing that my part of the way that I understand this pursuit of well-being is when I get to like connect it with other people and help other people like unpack it with me. And so whether it's people who are already on this pursuit or aren't yet, like being able to do it alongside them a little bit has been really, really great, because the shared like common passions that come out of that and interests that come out of that are what have sort of created some of these really strong relationships.
You know, in last week's episode of The Transformationist, I was talking with Timothy Eldred,
Oh yeah.
and he and I spoke about the problem of aloneness. And one of the things that we touched on is this idea of like, how do you form, how do you keep, how do you have good relationships with people that actually are part of nurturing yourself? Is there anything that stands out for you, or that's particular to you about the intentionality of creating relationships, or knowing how relationships feed into your overall well-being?
Yeah. So for me, like my pursuit of it kind of solidified some things in my mind that I thought were key for like finding well-balanced relationships. And I mean, the first big one is, I don't want to look at, my list of text messages in my phone and realize that every single person I've been communicating with on a regular basis is exactly like me, has the exact same background, that doesn't challenge me to view things differently, that doesn't hold me accountable to things. And so like I've intentionally tried to force myself into situations where I'm more of a minority voice, rather than the vast majority, so that I have to be quiet. Like I have to listen first, and I have to be willing to to be uncomfortable, in order for me to learn and for me to grow. And a lot of times that's produced really, really strong relationships with people who I would have never expected, but that help challenge me to grow in ways. And it's produced really rich friendships, that are well beyond just like the latest Marvel movie that I love, right? Like you need those friends that will like nerd out with you and go do those things. But at the same time, like, I really have come to appreciate friends who see things very differently than me, that, are in it with me to create a safe space where they can be themselves, I can be myself, and we can hold tension together. Because that to me is a healthy relationship. Not that like there will never be rocky waters. Like that is unhealth to me, because that means that like things are getting hidden, things are being talked about. But like if you're in a relationship with somebody who creates tension, and then at the end of it says, like, regardless, like it's like I love you and I care about you, like that's a healthy, in my mind, that's like a healthy ideal, in the best of ways.
Yeah.
Not a manipulative way,
Totally. Did it translate to your marriage, to your relationship with your wife during that month, while you were thinking about relationships in such an intentional way?
Yeah. So, I'm not going to say my Enneagram type, but like, it probably will be obvious. But what's like unique about Katie and I's relationship, my wife and I's relationship, is that like she and I are sort of compatible, but also sort of very different. And so for me, there are times when it is way easier for me to just like shut down and just like not talk about things, just to try and smooth things over. When in actuality, the healthiest thing is for me to actually ramp that up and to like fight that, do the emotional labor of like fighting that like urge to just shut down and just to agree, or just to like create peace, where there's like tension, because that is my commitment to a healthier relationship. If I choose to overcome and fight that, and do that emotional labor to like to be uncomfortable and be willing to like live in a state of like unrest, in order to make sure that she sees fully who I am and fully who my, what my thoughts are, what my perspective is. That is that's created a way healthier partnership between her and I than me shutting down, saying, okay, yep, whatever, like whatever you say, we'll do it, and then be miserable or bitter, later on, because my opinion isn't, being included or whatever, because again, I've created the expectation when I shut down and say, okay, fine, whatever. I've created the expectation then that my opinion in that area doesn't matter as much. So unless if I intentionally communicate that, like, I don't want to talk about this right now because I'm in an unhealthy situation, then there's no other reason why she should think that, like, oh, Jacob doesn't actually care as much about this thing as I do, so we'll just do this. And then the next time it comes up, it's the default of, oh, well, Jacob doesn't care as much about this thing, so we'll just do this. And so for me, it's been that, like, really like trusting our relationship enough that it can withstand my honesty in the midst of all of that, and that I'll still be safe, I'll still be loved. Like before I ever say anything, she and I are in it with each other, so that regardless of what's said, we know we're both in that safe place.
Hey there, transformationists. You've heard us talking in this episode about the action hero transformation archetype. And in previous shows, like with Al Campbell, episode 2 this season, we talked about the experimental scientist. If you are curious to know what your transformation archetype is, the good news is you can. It's quick, takes about 5 minutes. Head to thetransformationist.org/types. There you can take the quiz, find out more about your transformation archetype, and if you like, I can send you some helpful tips about how you can tackle change, your strengths, and the obstacles you might face along the way. That's it for now. Back to the episode. Don't you think it's such a paradox that in our most intimate of relationships, those are the ones that actually we can often struggle to bring our truest selves to? The idea that you're so deeply invested in this woman and this relationship and the life that you're building together, and yet you can still be struck down with the fear or the insecurity of bringing your whole self to it, and therefore lose the opportunity of precious kind of intimacy and acceptance that's right in front of you. I mean, it's just it's paradoxical to me that we it's so possible, so easy for us as human beings to actually disregard the intentionality of our marriages, of our partnerships in that way. Just because we sometimes, I think maybe we just don't want to do the work, or it feels somehow harder and more vulnerable in that space than it does anywhere else. The number of people who are totally willing to have confrontational, difficult conversations with their workmates, but don't want to have the same conversation at home with the person that actually, they love more than anyone else in the world. It's funny to me.
Right. And, and I don't know if this is true of everybody, but I know for me, like when I give in and like choose not to fight, like I'm hiding. Like I'm hiding my truest self and my honest self and my honest feelings. And when like I didn't realize it until after we had our first kid, but Katie and I were married 10 years before we got pregnant with Owen, and life was busy then, but it became really obvious how much I was hiding when our son was in our life, because of the exhaustion that comes along with like having a kid on top of like busy work schedules and stuff. And
you don't have any energy for those filters anymore.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like all of a sudden, all these things like pour out when a kid hasn't been sleeping for 4 months, right? So there's like all of these things. But what it's really helped me sort of unpack is the way that, for me personally, one of the ways that I create peace is I choose to hide behind a busy schedule. I choose to hide behind the attention I need to give Owen rather than the attention I should give Katie. I choose to hide behind the conveniences of like TV late at night when I should be having these difficult conversations. So I find all these methods of hiding away from to avoid that emotional labor of dealing with this stuff. And it gets tricky when it's like recognizing that, oh my goodness, it's way easier to expend energy on hanging out with my kid and taking care of my kid than it is to have a difficult conversation with my wife. Like hiding there is like a whole new level of like mind mess that happens. Like, cause you unpack like all of that and have to do that work of like, what does this mean? Like, how am I utilizing or manipulating the convenience of the difficulty of this relationship or of being a parent to avoid the difficulties of the relationship with my spouse? I don't know.
I mean, I think that's a human condition, but it is also something that in particular that the action hero archetype, does wrestle with a little more than anything else, because that particular challenge of the ease with which you can slip into the external activity around as a way of distracting or detracting or avoiding the internal is that's something, versus on the other end of the spectrum, people who can so easily, and you were kind of talking about it before, the philosophers and the spiritualists up the other end of the spectrum can hide within the internal, to avoid the external, action that's required. So we're all on the spectrum there somewhere of hiding and avoiding, and we just find different ways of doing it, right?
I love how like you've been able to connect all these pieces of humanity together in this. I mean, I've never considered myself an action hero type person, but I'll take it. Just because you say it, I'll take it.
Well, it's more to do with the way that you find yourself in processes of transformation and change, and in scenarios of change, right?
Sure.
So, and I think to that end, clearly you're someone who's who's always going to end up being more motivated to do something, whether it's whatever it is. So let's talk then about month number 3, because relationships was huge. Let's talk about month number 3 and the idea of security.
Yeah, and for me, there's each of these are like really flowed well into each other, and security was closely tied to relationships, because so much of my life has been anchored around the people in my life, and so the way that I started to approach it was, from one instance, like what would need to change, like what would need to go away for me to start losing that sense of security, because I feel very secure, like in who I am, and what my role sort of can be in life. Now, like the iteration of that is where insecurity comes sometimes, like what it needs to be in this season and what it could be in that season, all of that. And so what I appreciate about this is that it's less about like financial security for me, which like some people would translate that into financial security. But for me, I just personally went to like outside of that stuff for where I'm at, like relationally. Where do I find that sense of security? Where do I walk into those conversations and know, before I ever perform, before I ever achieve anything, that I am like welcomed, that I am loved, regardless? Because I mean, the reality is like I'm not any sort of name, right? Like I don't have any sort of recognition. I show up just as many times in Google as everyone else would show up in Google. So it's like, it's that sort of thing that like, for me, I started to find security in knowing who those people were in my life that could reflect that sense of security back to me and remind me of that. And that's just personally where I'm at right now in this this kind of discovery of what it means. Eventually, I'll have to deal with the fact that what happens when those people go away, right? Or when I need to transition out of some of those relationships, or if they pass away, or whatever it is. There's all these pieces that I need to anchor myself in, but I used to try and get a sense of security from figuring out how much I can achieve, as if like building up this like list of like names that are like important, or like work things that are important, or life achievements that are important, as a way of creating a sense of security. And I had to wrestle with some of those at the very beginning of that month, but because I was going into it so focused on relationships, I think that helped me get through a lot of that stuff really quickly, to get to like a deeper sense of, regardless of what big or like small things I accomplish in my life, that my life has value, that my life has purpose, that I am worth, everything just the same, regardless of what's in my bank account or what titles on my job, or who, you know, famous or not, will answer my phone call, all of those things. The one thing I would say is that if I could get on Natasha's podcast, then I'll have that achievement I've been wanting. So this is it. So thank you for doing that. That's the one thing, the one caveat I had. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like security, I don't know if it was I'm sure it's different for everybody, but for me, it wasn't quite as impactful. Like I felt like halfway through the month, I was like, all right, I can move on. Like I feel good right now. And so I kind of had to like intentionally like draw it out and make sure, like, is this like, am I hiding again? Am I running from some sort of internal emotional labor because it felt like it went so easily? But the month I just wrapped up around purpose was another like really difficult one, kind of like health, for me. But yeah.
Well, so let's talk about purpose, because when you were introducing yourself and your story, in many respects, the job that you have now would sound to a lot of people like, oh, this is a great job that's full of purpose and full of meaning, and they might assume that the foundation is sort of set there, regardless of what their own spiritual or religious perspectives might be. There's something about when you tick the boxes of not-for-profit and working with young people and the idea of mission or service kind of trips, that seems like those ideas or those words seem kind of imbued with meaning that has virtue and value associated with it. But purpose is often a little bit bigger than that. We can find ourselves involved in all sorts of meaningful activity that don't necessarily connect as deeply with the idea of purpose in our identity, and in our being. Those are my reflective questions going into then asking you, talk to me then about this month of purpose and exploring what purpose means for you as a person.
Yeah. So for me, I actually started out the month going back to a TED talk by Terry Trespicio, which I'm sure I butchered that name, so I apologize. But she had a TED talk on, it was titled "Stop Searching for Your Passion." And the reason why I went towards that TED talk is because when I first watched it a couple of years ago, it frustrated me because I felt like she didn't get it. Like I felt like she didn't see it the way that I saw it. But I went back to this TED talk because passion, when I think about my purpose, I think it's actually that alignment of like, I used to define it as the alignment of our passion meeting the world's need. Like that creates our purpose. But what I started to like wrestle with was, what if we don't just have one passion? Like what if our passion changes? Like, does that mean our purpose changes, or is our passion more like undefined? Like, is there just one passion for everybody? And if it changes, does that mean your passion is less valuable than somebody's so there's all of these questions around that. So for me, I kind of like anchored my pursuit of understanding what purpose means to me based off of like uncovering some of like really two myths that I've like I came to believe about passion, and one is that there's just one of them, that there's just one passion, and that the passion will always be the same for your entire life, and the second one is that passion has to be found, uncovered, discovered before life or work is meaningful. And when I go back and like watch Terry's TED talk, I'm in that perspective, I all of a sudden have like turned 180 degrees, and I'm resonating with her, because the season of life that I walked through 2 years ago, I was in an organization doing an exact job that was like that perfect alignment of how I had always been defining my passion, meeting the world's need, creating that purpose. And then when that job went away, all of a sudden I wasn't able to do that passion, anymore. So I felt like my purpose wobbled, and that is what really caused the concern in my life of like, what if that happens again? Like, I don't like the idea of not being in control of my purpose. Like, that sounds dangerous. Like if you gift that control to someone or something else, and anchor that in a job or in a person, and that job goes away or that person goes away or whatever, your purpose disappears too. And I kind of found myself in that situation, and so I was trying to understand, do some like retroactive, like looking back on a year where I felt like my purpose had like been decimated or like torn apart, and then putting it back together. And so, I mean, there's, in my mind, like when I can get rid, and I use present tense because I'm still in the midst of transformation with this, and so I hope that's okay. but like, if I address like that first myth of there just being one like passion that results in one purpose, then I look at everything else in my life that runs again on a parallel plane, and see how untrue that is. I look at my own faith story. I had, a like singular moment earlier on in my life that I came to know my faith and spirituality in a new way. But then, and I thought that was it, and that I will forever be changed from that point forward. But the reality was, 2 years later, I had just as important, like I had another pivotal moment that was just as important in my faith. And then 10 years later, it was another pivotal moment. It was just as important. And that doesn't mean that my faith at either point along the way is less valuable or wasn't real. It just means that I needed my faith perspective to change. And that sort of like revelation, that eye-opening that happens in our passions too. And especially when you free yourself up from this notion of just like having one passion in life that you have to uncover, that like helps respond to that, for me, that second myth of like the passion has to be found first before everything you do is meaningful, because that frees you up to figure out what can be meaningful now. Like what work can you do that's important now, regardless of where you're at, like, and then your passion kind of comes along with it. Once you recognize and once you put meaning into the work that you do, regardless of what it is, that can be, a part of what creates that spark for passion. And so your pursuit of those things, don't have to happen like your pursuit of passion doesn't have to happen first, but it can happen along the way. Again, like as you move, as you do it, like whatever it is, as you're doing it, you can find your passion as you start to meet real needs and be like crazy generous when there's an opportunity to be generous, and respond to anybody's need around you, and being able to meet that fully with who you are, to pour your attention into it, to fix real problems, whether that's organizationally, whether it's, dealing with systemic issues like in communities or whatever it is. If you meet a real problem, somebody will notice, and people noticing that and connecting it back to the work that you did can create the passion that you've been searching for. that then like fulfills that purpose. So that was a whole lot, Natasha.
It was, but it was good. It was good.
I'm glad that you think so. That's where, if it's helpful to know like what state my brain is in at the end of each of these months, that's like the state. It's just like this overwhelming kind of flood of thoughts that I'm trying to. I'm not saying that like I have it figured out, but I'm saying I've got a new perspective now that I'm going to piece together along the way. Because I believe that like when you do that, that's what creates real purpose, rather than trying to build a box for your life to fit in. And then you spend all of your life building that box and you don't ever have any time to enjoy it and be in that box. So like build it as you go, right? Like figure it out as you go. Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop.
No, I mean, I there's so much in that I think is meaningful for a wide variety of people. The first thing that I want to do is talk about how hopeful it makes me, that shift in perspective and the way that you've been able to articulate it, how hopeful it makes me for the musicians and the photographers and the artists and people of, particularly I think in a millennial and a Gen Y generation, who have been sold, in addition perhaps to that mythology around you have to find your passion before you can apply it to meaningful work, that there is also a vast generation of people who have been sold or have bought into or are chasing the idea of having to turn their passion into their livelihood. That somehow the thing that you're passionate about should also be the thing that you devote all of your life into and give all of your energy into. When actually I think purpose is a much richer and broader thing or value to attach yourself to than just passion, because passion can change, just like you said, there can be more than one. And the things that motivate and drive us as 20-year-olds will be different from the things that motivate and drive us, or even the needs in the world that we recognize when we're 30 and 40 and 50. In the same way that our ability, our skill sets, our resources to be able to respond to those things also changes as we move through life. So it makes me really hopeful that that shift in perspective, might actually be key for somebody unlocking some kind of new hope or new perspective as they move through. The second thing for me is just how deeply I empathize with that story. And I think so many of us do. And if you think about the traditional trajectory of your average Western young person, going to high school, being encouraged to, and obviously there's multiple layers within that, but particularly within, within even low to medium to mid socioeconomic kind of groups, this idea that you'll go to high school, you'll figure out what you're good at. Because you're good at it, you better be passionate about it and want to do it. Right. And then you'll go to college or you'll go to and do an apprenticeship, but you'll learn how to do that thing well, and then you'll get a job doing that thing, and your whole life will just be structured around that one idea that you set out pursuing, really at a time often, if you think about people who are in there, and I'm a youth worker and you're a youth worker, so we can't help but go into these channels. But if you think about all of the brain chaos and development that's happening between the ages of 16 and 25, when so many of these key decisions are being made, it doesn't surprise me that John Mayer then wrote a song about a quarter life crisis, because you get out of all of that stuff and then all of a sudden realize that maybe the plan that you had for your life, the passion that you were chasing, or the job that was, the thing, is maybe not going to work anymore. And that, so the empathy that I have, and I've been in that situation too, where, the job that I had for 10 years that I would have called both my passion and my purpose, then all of a sudden one day it went away. And I liked what you said in terms of calling it a purpose wobble, that your purpose wobbled. Because I think
Yeah.
that's interesting. What was your experience when your purpose wobbled? What happened in your life as a result?
Yeah, well, I'm going to lean into my action hero type that I've been unpacking ever since I took your personality quiz thing. So for me, when that wobble happens, like I personally just jumped right into, like, I worked harder than I ever worked before, spent more hours trying to solve problems and, like, just figure out what the biggest, like, need was right in front of me. What was the most critical, the most on fire, and just meet that and just, like, fix that first. And for me, I just didn't do it in a healthy way because I I wasn't anchored in these other things of well-being. That's the tension that I feel like I've been uncovering as I've been spending time walking through very specific aspects of well-being. Is that if you're only pursuing one and you're not conscious of all the others, it is very easy to be incredibly unhealthy, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to have a really messed up sense of your well-being because you're so laser focused on that all the other pieces and all the other areas of your life are just withering. And so that's what was happening to me, is that, like, I I was so focused on meeting, like, these critical needs, which now, honestly, I define as one key aspect of my purpose, is just finding a need around me and meeting it. But for me, it was being done with my sense of well-being out of balance. And when that happens, it's super destructive for me personally. And so I spun it in the wrong way. And what I realized is that sense of imbalance meant that I no longer had control of my purpose. My purpose wasn't in my hands. It was being owned by whatever was on the most fire. Whichever one was, like, falling apart the most, whatever need that was where I was placing my purpose. And there's a whole lot of um, freedom when all the other pieces of your well-being are in place, so that you can step back in the midst of all these needs that are burning and say, you know what? My purpose isn't to align to meet that need. Like, I'm not going to do that. It's not who I am. It's not in the sense of all the other ways that I know about myself. And that frees you up, so that if you're ever in a dream job or in a relationship that at one point was that, like, perfect alignment of all those things, and all of a sudden you learn something and it no longer is, that's the freedom that you have to quit. Like, that's always the freedom that, like, for me, that's recognizing that the minute you say, well, that's out of my hands, it's out of my control, there's nothing I can do about it, I'll just put up with it. Like, choosing to just put up with that is giving away your purpose. I mean, one of the things that was so pivotal for me, just a couple of months ago, like at the very beginning stages of this, was I was in a conversation with somebody who really was like a hero of mine. And I've been somebody I've looked up to, and I still do, but I looked up to them in a very, like, idealized way for a long, long time. They were just pivotal, even from a significant distance. They were pivotal in my life. And I got into a conversation with them about something that I just sensed was just off and that I disagreed with. And their response to me was, well, I felt like I tried everything I could do and it's out of my hands. That's just the way that life is. We just have to, like, put up with it. It's not ideal, but it's just the way the life is. And I told them, if that's true, then quit. Like, if this means enough to you, like you say it does, and the true situation is the environment that you're in, that you've created, has fostered this thing that you don't believe in, then quit. like you have the freedom to walk away, and they were not happy about that. Their
Really?
response was not well received.
That's so surprising to me.
But I mean, that to me, that was a sense of like, gosh, like if I was in that situation from an outside in, like I would have like seen it as, in this moment, I've chosen to give my purpose, the definition of my purpose. I've chosen to let that be defined by somebody else, by like, especially in this role. And if it's something that just doesn't align to the core of like some of the things that I believe about life, about the equality of all people, about the every aspect of humanity being cherished, if that is not celebrated in my work, then the freedom I have of owning and defining my purpose is that I can choose to leave that and go find it elsewhere.
Mm.
And I don't know, for me, that's been super freeing because the two areas of purpose that I've been currently defining my life as over the last 30 days has been, number one, like connecting dots that need to be connected, and number two is meeting needs of people that I believe in, and of in the midst of that are in the midst of work that I believe in. So like those two things, I can do whether I'm working for a missions organization or whether I'm working at McDonald's. Like I can do those two things no matter where,
Mm-hmm.
because with it you can always find them. So yeah.
But I think that's so true. It really is. And that was I mean, in my own story, and I'm going back, I'm going back 10 plus years. Oh my goodness, that's a long time. But that was a pivotal moment of realizing that actually the job was not my purpose, even though the job felt like what I would call a calling. It felt like everything that was on mission about my life. It was very, very on brand for me. But the reason why it was so on brand is because it was a perfect vehicle for the purpose, for my true purpose, which is that I like to help people change the way they think, because if you change the way you think, you can change your life. And so that purpose was actually the thing that was underlying all of the work that I did in that particular job, helping people see things differently, helping people think about things differently. But making that connection, or realizing that actually the job was just the vehicle for the purpose. The purpose was something bigger all along. And in that purpose being bigger, it was also able to be smaller, and it was able to be wider, and it was able to be shorter, or it was able to be taller, because the purpose itself is big and malleable and will fill in the space that you give it, I think, which I think speaks to your point about you can take your purpose into a job at McDonald's, or you can take your purpose into, driving trucks or picking up garbage, or, in so many spaces. I think that can exist. And so,
yeah. Well, and I was silently snapping as you you were communicating that stuff, because that's so exactly how I feel, and in words that I would have never thought to put together. So you've done it again for me, Natasha.
Oh, stop it. You're so kind. Usually people come on the show and I'm trying to shower them with compliments. What do you think, if people were looking for a couple of pointers, a place to get started, a jumping off point into finding their purpose, or maybe defining their purpose in a way that's broader than just a job or a career or an idea, from your own experience, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it happens on a very like practical level. Number one, I think it's choosing to recognize areas where you're hiding, in life, where you're choosing to not pursue that purpose fully, or if you find yourself towing that line of saying, I want to create or find or uncover my passion before I go out and do to like create my purpose somewhere, that can mean so many different things and so many different places, for lots of different people. So there's that aspect, of just choosing to recognize those points in your life where you're intentionally hiding away from that. You're choosing to not move because you're paralyzed by this idea of, I got to figure out my passion first, and that's just not. It's just not true. The other side of it is to constantly look for ways, small and large, to like challenge yourself and put yourself outside of your comfort zone, because it could be that what you thought was your purpose was actually way too limiting of who you are and the gifts and talents that you have. And honestly, like, so much of my life in the last 4-ish years has been defined by this moment where I went through Seth Godin's Alt MBA class. And I, like, on a whim, applied to be a part of it, thinking I am just some youth worker in the middle of the Midwest, small town, nowhere. There's no way I'm going to get accepted into this class. They only accept 100 people. And when I got accepted, I didn't know what to do. I was like freaking out, thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the only youth worker in here. And it's sure enough, I was. But like that intentional push to like consistently put myself into projects, working with people from CEOs to marketing directors to anyone and everyone in between that have all been a part of this experience. They were constantly reminding me and had this rally cry of, if you're not doing the emotional labor of walking into your discomforts, of challenging the things that you thought were true, and uncovering things that are new about yourself, then you are hiding. You truly are. And if you're in the midst of that, then you're not giving yourself a chance to build your passions as you go, and to create that life that you want as you go. You're choosing to, in some instances, sit back and let your passion try to find you before you do anything. And one of the things that Terry, in her TED Talk, said that I love so much is that to live a life full of meaning and value, you don't follow your passion, but your passion follows you. And so the idea of just moving, just like choosing to walk into those areas of discomfort and not shut down, to do that emotional labor and continue to move forward, that in itself, eventually you'll start to see that your passion is following in your wake, rather than hoping that it comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, here, come this way, because that just will never happen.
I cannot thank you enough for sharing your story so openly, but also with so much wisdom and insight. It is, I think, really powerful when people are able to, whilst they're still in the midst of journeying, be able to turn that insight and turn that reflection into positive action steps forward for other people. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. What's next? You've got 2 months to go. So what are you going to be focused on next?
So, I mean, for me, my next two are community and environment. So, like, the question I'm asking, trying to answer for myself on community is, what does community look like for me in a world where I've got friends literally all over the world? Like, what does that community look like? How do I create it? And then the third one is, or the final one is the environment, which is what or who has helped or will help me build and maintain an environment where my well-being is celebrated and not torn down. So it's kind of that culmination of, like, for me, it's like the last coat over everything, to kind of like make sure that at the end of the day, what are the checkpoints for an environment where all of these pieces of well-being are constantly being held in balance. And we'll see what life is like at the end of that. It's fascinating to think of, in the midst of this, we're going to be adding a human to our family, which will be a new challenge to all of these things. But but that's what's next for me. And then just continuing to try and embrace that idea of my purpose being connecting dots that need to be connected and helping fix problems that need fixing. Those two things, I think, will be just as closely tied in with the next two pieces of my pursuit of well-being as health has been from the beginning. And so,
do you have a working definition of well-being now?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay. Well, when you do, be sure and let me know so that we can share the rest of this. So that we can share the rest of the story with the transformationist community. Thank you so much for taking the time, and can't wait to hear what happens next. And I'm glad. I hope I get to be part of the community that you form.
Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, I really appreciate being able to share and being on your podcast. It's a thrill.
Hi, it's Tash, and it's time for the credits. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Transformationist. Please subscribe, rate, and review this episode wherever you listen to it, and share it with a friend. Visit thetransformationist.org for links to the resources mentioned in this episode and to subscribe to our email updates. You can also share your transformation story with us there, and I would love to hear from you. As always, this episode is produced by Michael Yoder at Truthwork Media. Music is by Hans Van Vliet. For more about me and the transformation work I do, check out the website. This show is proudly made possible by Solar Feeder Consulting.